Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In this second episode, Kofi and Amma are racing against time and facing betrayals that cut deep. Their fight against a powerful cult takes them from high-stakes chases in the neon-lit streets of Kisa to deadly traps and tense showdowns in abandoned warehouses. As they expose secrets that could shake the city to its core, they must also navigate a web of false allies and shifting loyalties. Every lead brings hope but also reveals new dangers, with enemies always one step ahead. Will Kofi and Amma's courage and the alliances they forge be enough to outmaneuver the cult, or are they playing right into their enemies' hands? The clock is ticking, and the shadows are closing in. Stay tuned to see how their desperate fight for freedom unfolds. Kofi's mind was in overdrive as he sped through the city, every nerve on edge. He needed to find the woman, but the cult was always a step ahead. The streets of Kisa were a blur of neon lights and bustling crowds, but Kofi felt alone, hunted. He couldn't go to the police, they were probably in on it, too. His only hope was to follow the clues in the black book, to outsmart a game that was designed to consume him. As he rifled through the pages, a small map fell out. It was crude, hand-drawn, but it showed a location on the outskirts of Kisa, a warehouse, far from the city's prying eyes. Kofi's heart pounded. It was his only lead, and he knew he had to act fast. The drive to the warehouse felt like an eternity. Kofi kept checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see Mr. Masego's men tailing him. But the roads were empty, and the city's glow faded into the darkness of the industrial outskirts. When Kofi finally arrived, the warehouse loomed before him, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. He approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. The air was thick with the smell of oil and decay, and the silence was unnerving. Kofi edged around the side of the building. He found a side entrance, the door slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, Kofi pushed it open and slipped inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air cold and musty. Stacks of crates and machinery filled the space, casting long shadows that danced in the flickering light. Kofi moved quietly, his footsteps echoing softly. He heard muffled voices ahead, followed by the faint sound of a struggle. Kofi's pulse quickened. He crept forward, peering around a stack of crates. The sight before him made his blood run cold. The woman from the mansion was on a chair, her face red and her eyes wide with fear. Surrounding her were three men in dark suits, Mr. Masego's enforcers. One of them held a notebook, tracing its edge against her cheek with a sickening smile. Kofi knew he had to act, but he couldn't risk a direct confrontation. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a stack of oil drums nearby. An idea sparked. Kofi aimed the marbles at the drums, sparking against the metal. The explosion was deafening, a fireball erupting and sending the enforcers diving for cover. Amidst the chaos, Kofi rushed forward towards the woman. She stumbled, barely able to stand, but Kofi caught her, pulling her to her feet. The room was quickly filling with smoke and flames, the air thick and choking. They had to get out, now. "Can you walk?" Kofi asked urgently, his grip firm around her arm. She nodded weakly, her eyes filled with gratitude but also fear. "We need to hurry. They won't give up." Kofi helped her through the maze of burning debris, the heat searing against their skin. The enforcers were scrambling, trying to regroup, but the fire had thrown them into disarray. Kofi kept his eyes forward, guiding the woman through the smoke and out into the cold night air. They stumbled into the open, gasping for breath, as the warehouse behind them roared with flames. Kofi didn't stop to look back. He led the woman to his car, helping her into the passenger seat. As he started the engine, the reality of their escape hit him. He had defied the cult, and now they would be relentless. They were marked, hunted, but Kofi was no longer just a pawn, he was ready to fight back. Driving through the empty streets, Kofi tried to gather his thoughts. The woman, whom he now knew as Amma, slumped beside him, exhausted but conscious. He glanced at her, catching the remnants of her defiance despite her red face. "Who are you really?" Kofi asked, navigating through the narrow alleyways of Kisa. "Why did they capture you?" Amma winced, touching her swollen cheek. "I was one of them once, a recruiter like you. But I saw too much, learned too much. The elders don't like loose ends." Kofi processed her words, realizing she had once been in his shoes, maybe even more deeply entangled in the cult's web. "Why did you warn me? You could have stayed quiet, kept yourself safe." Amma gave a bitter smile. "Because I know what they do to people like us. The promises they make. It's all a lie. I wanted out, and I thought maybe I could help you get out too, before it was too late." Kofi tightened his grip on the steering wheel, anger bubbling inside him. He had been lured in by the allure of wealth and power, but it was all an illusion, a trap. And now, he was in too deep. He knew he had to end this, but how could he possibly take on the cult and the mysterious elders who controlled everything? Amma coughed, her voice strained. "There's one way. We have to expose them, show the world who they really are. It's the only way to cut off their power." Kofi's heart raced. "Expose them? How? They've covered their tracks at every turn." Amma pulled a small flash drive from her jacket, holding it up. "This. It has everything, names, transactions, rituals. Proof that could bring them down. But it won't be easy. They have eyes everywhere." Kofi took the drive, his mind reeling. This was their chance, their only shot at freedom. But he knew the cult would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. They were up against a powerful enemy with deep roots and ruthless tactics. As they drove through the city, Kofi noticed the headlights of a car in his rearview mirror, following closely. His heart pounded. "Amma, we are being followed." Amma glanced back, her expression tense. "It's them. They're not going to let us go that easily." Kofi floored the gas pedal, weaving through traffic as the pursuing car sped up, trying to keep pace. The chase intensified, with Kofi taking sharp turns and narrow alleyways, but the cult's car was relentless. Amma gripped the seat, her knuckles white. "They'll try to run us off the road. We need to lose them." Kofi's mind raced, searching for a way out. Up ahead, he spotted a construction site with a narrow path leading through piles of debris. It was risky, but they had no other option. Kofi swerved sharply, the tires screeching as they barreled through the site. The car behind them hesitated, unable to make the tight turn, and slammed into a stack of metal pipes with a deafening crash. Kofi and Amma sped away, their hearts pounding. They had escaped, but Kofi knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The cult would keep coming, and their only chance was to strike fast. Kofi and Amma drove through the night, finally arriving at a small, secluded safe house on the outskirts of Kisa. Amma had set it up years ago, a fallback in case she ever needed to disappear. It was nothing more than a modest cottage surrounded by thick, overgrown foliage, but it offered a momentary respite from the chaos. Inside, Amma slumped onto a worn-out couch, her breath ragged. Kofi paced the room, his mind racing with plans and fears. He clutched the flash drive tightly, feeling the weight of the information it contained. This little piece of technology held their only hope. "We need to find someone we can trust," Amma said, her voice hoarse. "Someone who can get this data out without being compromised." Kofi nodded, but his thoughts were clouded. Who could they turn to? The police, the media, even the government, they were all potential allies but also potential enemies. The cult's reach was extensive, and one wrong move could seal their fate. Just then, Amma's phone buzzed. She hesitated before answering, her expression unreadable. "Hello." Kofi watched as Amma's face shifted, her eyes narrowing. She glanced at Kofi, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "It's Ni. He says he can help." Ni was an old friend of Amma's, a tech expert who had dabbled in the underworld but had since gone straight. If anyone could navigate the murky waters they found themselves in, it was him. Kofi felt a glimmer of hope. They arranged to meet Ni at a remote location, a crumbling, abandoned church that stood as a relic of a bygone era. As Kofi and Amma approached, the air was heavy with tension. Ni was waiting for them, his laptop set up on a makeshift desk near the altar. Ni greeted Amma with a nod, his eyes scanning Kofi with cautious curiosity. "This is bigger than I thought," Ni said, glancing at the flash drive. "If what's on here is legit, it could bring down half the city's elite." Kofi handed the drive to Ni, his hands shaking. "Do it. Whatever it takes." Ni plugged in the drive, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The screen flickered with lines of code and data, and Kofi felt a surge of anxiety. This was it. Their last, desperate gamble. Minutes stretched into hours as Ni worked, decrypting files, bypassing security measures, then setting up secure uploads. The tension in the room was palpable, every sound amplified in the stillness of the old church. Finally, Ni leaned back, a satisfied grin on his face. "It's done. The data is out, sent to every major news outlet and whistleblower site. The truth is out there now. The cult can't hide anymore." Kofi exhaled, a mix of relief and dread flooding him. They had done it. But as they stood in the church, the weight of their actions settled in. They had exposed a powerful enemy, but they were far from safe. The cult's retaliation would be swift and merciless. Kofi turned to Amma, his resolve hardened. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Amma nodded, her eyes fierce. "No, it's just beginning." As they left the church, the city of Kisa seemed different, still cloaked in darkness, but now with a glimmer of light piercing through. Kofi knew they were on the run, but for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. They had struck a blow against the cult, and now it was their turn to fight back. Kofi and Amma returned to the safe house, their minds buzzing with adrenaline and the reality of what they had just done. The news had spread like wildfire, the city of Kisa was ablaze with whispers of scandal, betrayal, and hidden secrets of the cult that had once operated in the shadows. As they watched the first reports roll in on Amma's small TV, Kofi felt a mix of triumph and dread. The cult was exposed, but the battle was far from over. Kofi barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, put him on edge. He knew the cult wouldn't just sit back and watch as their empire crumbled. They would be hunting him and Amma, determined to punish them before more damage could be done. The next morning, a knock on the door jolted Kofi awake. He grabbed a stick, a bed lamp, and approached cautiously. Amma signaled for silence, peering through a small gap in the curtain. Standing outside was a disheveled man, his clothes dirty and torn, but his eyes wide with desperation. Kofi opened the door a crack. "What do you want?" The man glanced over his shoulder nervously. "Please, you have to help me. They're after me too." Kofi hesitated but let the man in, locking the door behind him. "Who are you?" "My name is Kwame," the man said, panting. "I was a member, like you. I saw what you did on the news. I need out. They are cleaning house, anyone who's ever been involved, they are coming for us all. Kofi exchanged a look with Amma. This was bigger than they had anticipated. The cult was imploding, and now ex-members were desperate, fearing for their lives. We can't protect everyone, Amma said bluntly. We barely got out ourselves. Kwame shook his head, his eyes pleading. I have information. Important information. I know where they're hiding. The elders, the leaders, they have a secret location. If you help me, I can show you where it is. Kofi's mind raced. This could be the key to finally bringing down the cult for good. But it was also a massive risk. Trusting Kwame could lead them into a trap, and they couldn't afford to make mistakes. Amma seemed to sense Kofi's hesitation. We have to do this. If we can take down the leaders, we end this once and for all. Kofi nodded, gripping Kwame's arm. Okay. But if you're lying, we'll be the ones hunting you. Understand? Kwame nodded fervently. I swear. I just want out. Kwame led Kofi and Amma through the outskirts of Kisa, down winding roads and hidden paths that few knew existed. They moved cautiously, their senses heightened as if danger lurked behind every corner. The city seemed quieter than usual, an unsettling calm that only intensified Kofi's unease. We are close, Kwame said, stopping near an abandoned industrial area. The ground was littered with broken glass and rusted machinery, the remnants of a once bustling factory. They are hiding in there. Kofi surveyed the area, noting the shadows and blind spots. It was the perfect place for an ambush. He gripped Amma's hand, his heart pounding. Stay close. As they crept closer, Kofi felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something wasn't right. Kwame seemed jittery, his movements erratic. Kofi glanced at Amma, who had the same suspicion in her eyes. Without warning, Kwame broke into a sprint, bolting into the factory. Kofi cursed under his breath, chasing after him, Ama close behind. They burst into the factory, and Kofi skidded to a halt. Kwame stood in the center, surrounded by cult enforcers. The elders loomed in the background, their faces obscured by hoods but their presence unmistakable. Kwame had led them into a trap. You've done well, Kwame, one of the elders said, his voice dripping with cold satisfaction. Loyalty will be rewarded. Kwame's face twisted with guilt as he looked at Kofi and Amma. I'm sorry, he whispered. I had no choice. Kofi felt rage boil within him. He had trusted Kwame, risked everything, and now they were surrounded with no escape. The elders stepped forward, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. You thought you could expose us, one of the elders sneered. You are nothing but pawns in our game. Kofi clenched his fists, ready to fight. But as the enforcers closed in, Amma pulled a small vial from her pocket. She smashed it on the ground, releasing a thick, blinding smoke that filled the factory. Run! Amma shouted, grabbing Kofi's arm. They bolted through the smoke, dodging the enforcers' grasping hands. Kofi's lungs burned as he sprinted, the shouts of the cult members echoing behind them. They burst out of the factory, gasping for air, and didn't stop running until they reached their car. Kofi slammed the door shut, his hands trembling as he started the engine. We trusted him. He set us up. Amma's face was grim. We have to be smarter. The cult will never stop until they have us or we take them down. As they sped away, Kofi's mind was a whirlwind of fear and fury. They had been betrayed, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. The game was far from over, and Kofi was more determined than ever to bring the cult to its knees. Kofi and Amma returned to the safe house, still reeling from the betrayal. Amma paced the room, her mind working through their next move. Kofi sat in silence, staring at the flash drive that had set everything in motion. They had struck the cult, but the cult had struck back just as hard. Amma stopped, turning to Kofi with a sudden intensity. We need more than just information. We need to hit them where it hurts. Kofi looked up, confused. What do you mean? Amma's eyes were fierce. We need to find their money. The funds that keep them operating. If we can cut off their resources, they'll be vulnerable. Kofi thought about the man in the black suit who used to visit the bank every Monday. The endless flow of cash that had first sparked his curiosity. The deposits, Kofi realized. That's how they fund everything. We need to follow the money. Amma nodded. Exactly. If we can trace it back, find the source, we can cripple them. They spent the next few hours poring over the data on the flash drive, searching for any clues that could lead them to the cult's financial network. As the sun began to rise, Kofi's eyes landed on a series of transactions that stood out, a pattern of payments funneled through various shell companies, all leading back to one account. Amma leaned over his shoulder, her expression grim. That's it. That's their war chest. Kofi copied the account details, his heart pounding with anticipation. They had a lead, but getting to the funds would be another challenge entirely. They needed someone who could break through the digital walls protecting the cult's assets. Amma made a call, speaking in hushed tones. She hung up and turned to Kofi. We have a hacker. A good one. But it'll cost. Kofi nodded. Whatever it takes. We can't stop now. They arranged to meet the hacker, a wiry young man named Joe who operated out of a small, cluttered apartment in the heart of Kisa. Joe was confident, almost cocky, as he sat down in front of his computer. This isn't your average bank job, Joe said, cracking his knuckles. These guys know how to hide their tracks. But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Kofi watched anxiously as Joe worked, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The room was filled with the soft hum of the computer and the clicking of keys. Kofi's nerves were on edge, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, Joe leaned back, a triumphant smile on his face. Got it. They've got a lot of money stashed, but I've locked them out. It'll take them days, maybe weeks, to regain access. Kofi felt a surge of hope. They had dealt a critical blow, but he knew this was just the beginning. The cult would come back harder, more desperate, but Kofi was ready. He and Amma were no longer just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. As they left Joe's apartment, Kofi felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were hitting back, and for the first time, the cult was on the defensive. But Kofi also knew that with every move they made, the danger grew. The cult was cornered, and a cornered enemy was the most dangerous of all. Kofi and Amma lay low, knowing that the cult's retaliation would be swift and brutal. Days passed in tense silence, each one longer than the last. Amma had taken to monitoring the news obsessively, watching for any sign that the cult was cracking under the financial pressure they had inflicted. Kofi, meanwhile, was restless. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Late one night, as Kofi sat in the dim glow of his phone, a notification popped up, an anonymous message, "We know where you are. There's no escape." His heart froze. He jumped up, rushing to Amma, who was already on her feet, her expression alarmed. "We have to go," Kofi said urgently. "Now." Amma didn't argue. They grabbed their essentials and slipped out the back door, moving swiftly through the darkness. They had been careful not to leave a digital trail, but it seemed the cult had eyes everywhere. The safe house was no longer safe. They made their way to a rundown hotel on the other side of Kisa, paying cash for a room. It was small and dingy, but it offered temporary refuge. Kofi slumped against the wall, his mind racing. The cult's reach was longer than they had anticipated. Amma paced, chewing her lip. "They're toying with us. They want us scared." "Well, it's working," Kofi snapped, his frustration boiling over. We are running blind here. Amma stopped, fixing him with a steely gaze. No, we are not. We've rattled them. That's why they are doing this. They are afraid of what we might do next. Kofi looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. Amma was right. The cult was scared. They had gone from invincible to vulnerable in a matter of days, when Kofi and Amma were the catalysts. Then we need to hit them again, Kofi said, regaining his resolve. Harder this time. The next day, Amma reached out to a journalist known for exposing corruption in high places. His name was Malik, a man with a reputation for getting to the truth no matter the cost. They met him in a crowded cafe, choosing a table at the back where they could talk without being overheard. Malik was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a notepad that looked like it had seen 100 stories. He listened intently as Kofi and Amma laid out the details of the cult, their leaders, and the operations that had brought them millions. Malik's expression remained neutral, but Kofi could see the wheels turning in his mind. This is explosive, Malik said, jotting down notes. But going public with this will put a target on all our backs. Are you sure you're ready for that? Kofi nodded, his resolve unwavering. They are already after us. We have nothing to lose. Malik nodded slowly. All right. I'll dig deeper, see what I can find. But be careful. They'll know someone's digging. As they left the cafe, Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Malik had agreed too easily, and his calm demeanor didn't quite match the urgency of their situation. Amma sensed it too but dismissed it as paranoia. They had no choice but to trust him, for now. 2 days later, Malik called with a lead, a high-ranking cult member willing to talk. Kofi and Amma arranged to meet him at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. But as they approached the meeting spot, Kofi's instincts screamed at him to turn back. The warehouse was dark, too quiet, the kind of place where shadows swallowed secrets. They hesitated at the entrance, scanning the area. A figure emerged from the darkness, Malik. He waved them over, but his eyes darted nervously. Something's wrong, Kofi muttered to Amma, gripping her arm. This doesn't feel right. Before they could react, the warehouse lights flickered on, revealing a dozen cult enforcers surrounding them. Malik stepped back, his face pale. He had been compromised, and now Kofi and Amma were trapped. Sorry, Malik whispered. They got to me. Kofi's mind raced. They had been set up again. But this time, there was no escape. The enforcers closed in, their expressions cold and unyielding. Take them, one of the elders ordered from the shadows, his voice echoing through the empty space. Amma reached for the vial of smoke she always carried, but one of the enforcers knocked it out of her hand. Kofi lunged, throwing punches wildly, but he was outnumbered. The enforcers subdued them quickly, dragging them to the center of the warehouse. The elder stepped forward, pulling back his hood to reveal a familiar face, Kwame. His betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Kofi struggled against his captors, fury and disbelief surging through him. I warned you, Kwame said calmly. You should have stayed hidden. Kofi spat at his feet. This isn't over. Kwame smirked. Oh, it is. For you. With a nod, Kwame signaled the enforcers. They hauled Kofi and Amma into a van, their fates uncertain as the cult reasserted its control. As the van sped into the night, Kofi realized they were farther from victory than ever, but he refused to give up. He would find a way to turn the tide, no matter the cost. The van rattled down the dark streets, Kofi and Amma bound and gagged in the back. The air was thick with tension, each jolt and turn jarring their bruised bodies. Kofi's mind raced, searching for any possible escape. Amma's eyes were fixed on him, silently communicating their shared resolve. They weren't done fighting. The van came to a sudden stop, and the doors swung open. They were dragged out, blinking against the harsh light. A new location, another hideout, deeper underground and more secure. Kofi noted the layers of security, the armed guards, the surveillance cameras. The cult was tightening its grip. They were shoved into a cell, cold and bare, the sound of the heavy door slamming shut echoing ominously. Kofi tested the chains binding his wrists, his mind already working on an escape plan. Amma leaned against the wall, her breathing steady but her eyes full of fire. "We'll get out of this," Kofi whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the facility. Amma nodded. "We have to." Hours passed, then days. The cult members interrogated them relentlessly, demanding information about their contacts, their plans, their weaknesses. Kofi and Amma gave them nothing, holding on to the hope that they would find a way out. One night, as Kofi lay awake on the cold concrete floor, he heard a faint tapping, a rhythm he recognized. Amma was signaling to him in code, tapping out a plan they had devised in case of separation. It was their lifeline, a silent communication that kept them connected even in the darkest moments. The guards grew complacent, assuming Kofi and Amma were broken. But they were far from it. Each day, they observed, listened, and waited for the right moment. And then, it came, a shift change, a lapse in attention, a door left slightly ajar. Kofi and Amma sprang into action, using their chains as weapons. They took down the guards quickly, moving with the precision of a team that had nothing left to lose. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, dodging patrols and cameras, guided by the knowledge they had painstakingly gathered. As they reached the exit, they encountered a group of prisoners, other victims of the cult, captured and forgotten. Kofi hesitated, looking at Amma. They couldn't leave them behind. Amma nodded. "We are not the only ones fighting this." They freed the prisoners, arming them with whatever they could find. Together, they stormed the compound, a ragtag alliance driven by desperation and a shared enemy. The cult members were caught off guard, overwhelmed by the sudden revolt. Kofi led the charge, his voice rallying the others as they pushed through the facility. He kicked down the final door, leading them to freedom. As they spilled into the night, Kofi and Amma knew they had struck a blow against the cult that would resonate far beyond that single escape. The cult's power was waning, its members divided, and its secrets exposed. But Kofi also knew this was just one victory in a much larger war. The cult would regroup, and the real battle was still ahead. Kofi turned to Amma, his determination unshaken. "We keep fighting. We bring them down for good." Amma smiled, the fire in her eyes undimmed. "Until the end." They vanished into the night, the city of Kisa their battlefield. The cult had underestimated them, but Kofi and Amma were far from finished. The war against the shadows was only just beginning, and they were ready to see it through, no matter the cost. Will Kofi and Amma succeed in their war against the shadows? You will find out in the next episode.